Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This episode is supported by FX's Grotesquerie, a new series from executive producer Ryan Murphy. Heinous crimes unsettle a small community, and the local detective feels these atrocities are eerily personal, as if someone or something is taunting her. Starring Niecy Nash Betts, Courtney B. Vance, Leslie Manville, and Travis Kelce. FX's Grotesquerie premieres September 25th on FX. Stream on Hulu.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Let's start with a game of word association. What comes to mind when you hear the words demonic possession? For me, it conjures images of superhuman strength, clairvoyance, speaking in an unknown language, and of course, green pea soup. Now what comes to mind when you think about how a person becomes demon-possessed? For me, I instantly think of a Ouija board, or at least some other means of communicating with the spirit that somehow invites it in. Of course, your answers may be different than mine. What if I told you that in 2016, a man named Kennedy Ife was thought to be demon-possessed, and those suspicions began not with a Ouija board, or seance, or anything paranormal at all, but with a sore throat. Believing his afflictions were due to demonic possession, Kennedy Ife's family took matters into their own hands, with terrifying and tragic consequences. The aftermath sparked heated debate on whether the family should have sought medical treatment rather than spiritual treatment. Sometimes, the intersection between religion, medicine, and mental health is blurred at best. In this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the scary possession and exorcism of Kennedy Ife, a 26-year-old man who woke up one morning feeling ill and was declared demon-possessed. Along the way, we'll consider this question: was Kennedy Ife demon-possessed? Or did his illness have a more natural, rather than supernatural, explanation? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. In August 2016, 26-year-old Kennedy Ife was living in Enfield, North London, with his parents and 5 brothers. Kenneth, age 60, Josephine, age 56, Roy, age 33, Harry, age 32, Colin, age 26, and Samuel and Daniel, both age 20. Kennedy made a good living as a marketing consultant, and by all accounts, enjoyed life with his parents and siblings. The family was well known and well liked in the neighborhood, and they were considered deeply religious and, quote, were connected with the Jesus Sanctuary Ministries in Southeast London, end quote. One morning in mid-August 2016, Kennedy woke up with a strange pain in his throat. Feeling the pain was a bit unusual, he went to the doctor for a checkup. After a thorough examination, the doctor didn't find anything strange, and Kennedy was sent home. Despite this, the pain continued, and Kennedy reported feeling as if something was, quote, crawling around in his throat, end quote. As the pain worsened, so did Kennedy's behavior towards his family. He began suffering from mood swings, breathing problems, stomach pains, and more. He became increasingly aggressive towards others, and on one occasion, he bit his father. The outbursts were directed towards those closest to him and appeared to come out of nowhere. Kennedy began experiencing other physical symptoms: upset stomach, lack of appetite, rapid weight loss, and difficulty breathing. And as they worsened, he stopped attending work. Concerned about Kennedy's strange behavior, the family began considering their next steps. Remember, the doctor's exam did not reveal anything unusual about Kennedy's sore throat. Kennedy's father claimed his illness, mood swings, and increased irritability were likely due to sleep deprivation. But despite this declaration, Kennedy only sank further. On one occasion, Kennedy's brothers found him sitting in his room, talking to himself. At first, they didn't think anything of it. Talking to yourself is more common than we often think. But then they heard it. Multiple voices. Kennedy was sitting in his room talking to himself, except there was more than one voice. One article stated, quote, "What was even creepier was that there are multiple voices. Some were Kennedy's voice. Some were clearly Kennedy putting on what seemed a different voice. But others, they couldn't explain." Kennedy's family's concerns grew as his erratic behavior worsened. He would yell at his parents, curse at them, make messes, and have emotional outbursts that were uncharacteristic. He began breaking objects around the house and throwing food on the ground. The tantrums became increasingly aggressive and more frequent. And despite their best efforts, there was no relief for Kennedy or his family. Kennedy grew sicker and complained he was hearing voices in his head, and there was, quote, a snake-like creature inside of him, end quote. In one particularly scary event, one of Kennedy's brothers discovered him standing in the hallway. He was staring into the distance, like gazing at an unseen horizon. He appeared confused, and his hands were inside his boxers. When asked if there was something wrong, Kennedy responded that he wanted to cut off his penis. Kennedy then mentioned the mark of the beast and the number 666. Perhaps in a moment of lucidity, Kennedy began crying and calling out to God for forgiveness. Later, Kennedy told one of his brothers that there was something in his stomach, which he was convinced would turn into an evil snake. To that point, the family had taken the medical route when seeking treatment. They'd taken Kennedy to the doctor after he complained of a sore throat, only for the exam to come back normal. They'd watched helplessly as Kennedy's condition worsened, and they bore the brunt end of Kennedy's increasing verbal and physical assaults against them. Now, with his mental health seemingly in sharp decline, the family turned away from their doctor and towards their local pastor, a man named Andrew who volunteered at Jesus Sanctuary Ministries. I mentioned earlier that Kennedy and his family were deeply religious and had close connections with the Christian ministry in the area. It's worth noting that Kennedy's complaint of a serpent crawling around inside of him has religious connotations as well. Also worth noting, what I'm about to share is not an interpretation or diagnosis of Kennedy's ailment. Rather, I want to show a possible connection between Kennedy's claim and the religious significance of the snake. In the Old Testament, in Genesis 3, Eve is said to be tempted by a, quote, serpent who was more cunning than any animal of the field, end quote. The serpent spoke to Eve, questioned God's instructions to her and Adam, and deceived her and Adam into eating a forbidden fruit, which ultimately plunged humanity into condemnation. In the New Testament, in Revelation 12, which details the final destruction of Satan, he is described as a serpent. Quote, "The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him." End quote. The mark of the beast and the number 666 is a reference to Revelation 13, verses 11 through 18. Quote, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who live on it worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of the sky to the earth in the presence of the people. And he deceives those who live on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who live on the earth to make an image to the beast, who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause all who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, and the free and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads. And he decrees that no one will be able to buy or to sell, except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. End quote. Brother Andrew, along with 2 other ministers, Brother Peter and Brother Emeka, went to the home and prayed over Kennedy. A Daily Mail interview with Brother Andrew stated, quote, "When I arrived at church, I was informed that we had been instructed to attend the address of Sister Joe to pray for Kennedy. Together we arrived at Sister Joe's house at 10:59 p.m. Colin opened the door. We were ushered into the living room. I saw Kennedy lying down on the settee. He had a mobile phone in his hand. He seemed to be typing something on his phone, texting someone. I said hi. He said hi. He looked at me directly in the eyes. He looked unwell. He looked tired. He looked to me like he had a fever. He was not as bright as he had seemed when I met him in the past." End quote. No matter who showed up at the house, and no matter how many prayers were offered on Kennedy's behalf, nothing helped. In fact, he grew more angry, violent, and aggressive. Seeing that nothing was helping, Kenneth, Kennedy's father, became convinced he was demon-possessed. There are times in our lives when we reach the proverbial fork in the road, when we're faced with two seemingly impossible decisions. And in some ways, both decisions are a lose-lose. To this point, Kennedy's family had sought help from their doctor and their local church, to no avail. It appears Kennedy's father was faced with making an incredibly difficult decision: do nothing and watch Kennedy suffer, or intervene and hope Kennedy recovered. Convinced Kennedy was demon-possessed, and equally convinced that conventional medicine was of no help, Kenneth Ife decided he would cure Kennedy by forcefully restraining him and maintaining a constant prayer vigil. The family used cable ties, rope, and handcuffs to restrain him to the bed, and decided that an exorcism was needed to rid Kennedy of the demons who'd taken residence. For 3 days, the family kept him restrained and conducted multiple exorcisms to expel the evil spirits. Throughout the ordeal, Kennedy screamed, yelled, barked like a dog, and growled like an animal. One article stated, quote, "The family fully believed that a demon was inside him, something that was not from this world, and that it was trying to kill him from the inside. His brother said the restraining of Kennedy was needed. As he would either harm himself or the people in their family that were trying to assist." End quote. For 3 days, Kennedy lay restrained in his bed. And for 3 days, Kennedy's condition only grew worse. After 3 days, Kennedy's brother decided to call emergency services. He explained to dispatch that Kennedy had suffered a seizure and was, quote, "complaining of dehydration as well as having developed breathing issues," end quote. Shortly after the phone call, paramedics arrived to a shocking scene. There, lying in bed fully restrained, was Kennedy Ife, and surrounding him were his family members. They stood there, with arms stretched wide in front of them, praying and chanting for his resurrection. His brother Colin was heard saying, quote, "Kennedy, I commend you to rise in the name of Jesus. We thank you because his soul will be returned from the power of the grave. We thank you because his spirit has returned to himself. God, you have returned his spirit back into the body you gave him." End quote. Paramedics quickly took the restraints off Kennedy's body, and though they lowered his body temperature and attempted resuscitation, Kennedy Ife was pronounced dead at 10:17 a.m. An independent article stated, quote, "A post-mortem examination revealed more than 60 injuries on Mr. Ife's body, including a possible bite," end quote. The medical examiner concluded Kennedy Ife's cause of death was cardiac arrest. The subsequent police investigation turned up interesting pieces of evidence. A note in Josephine Ife's room, which read, quote, "If you feel your son is under a spell, pick up earth and throw it to north, south, east, and west for 4 days. After, there will be an encounter." End quote. In a neighboring garden, police officers discovered a bag, quote, "containing black handcuffs, cable ties, and wristbands," end quote, which was later described as the Ife family false imprisonment kit. After Kennedy's death, his parents and 5 brothers were charged with manslaughter, false imprisonment, and causing or allowing the death of a vulnerable adult. Prosecutor Tom Little, QC, claimed, quote, "His own family decided that because he had become and remained unwell, he should be restrained with cable ties, rope, and handcuffs. They decided that he should be restrained in his own home with them rather than calling 999. Ultimately, that restraint was a cause of his tragic death." End quote. He also told jurors, quote, "The family put misguided religious beliefs about this young man being possessed by a demon or evil spirits before the obvious and common sense conclusion that he needed help and did not need to be restrained. Instead of calling 999 or seeking other expert assistance, they sought to cure his perceived illness through prayer and restraint. Whether this was some form of exorcism will be a matter for you in due course." In short, the Ife family took the law into their own hands. End quote. In their defense, the family acknowledged the tragic situation, but denied, quote, "association with cults, occults, and secret societies played any part in the death." End quote. They were steadfast in their belief that Kennedy was demon-possessed, and that conventional medicine was unhelpful in alleviating his symptoms. Colin Ife told investigators, quote, "It's clear that thing was in him. What we believed was a demon, because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him." End quote. Despite the charges, after a 4-day deliberation, all 7 members of the Ife family were cleared of all charges. I'll confess, I'm not entirely sure what I think about this case, at least not entirely. I'm not sure if Kennedy Ife was demon-possessed, though it seems to me like he was suffering from a medical and mental health emergency. But I do believe Kennedy and his family believed he was demon-possessed. The family's religious convictions no doubt played a significant role in their decision to restrain Kennedy and perform a series of exorcisms. The relationship between religion and the law is outside the scope of my knowledge and expertise. But one article stated, quote, "In some cases, religious beliefs may be used to justify abusive or neglectful behavior, and it is up to the legal system to determine whether such behavior should be excused on the basis of religious freedom." End quote. My personal convictions compel me to believe that crime should be prosecuted to the fullest extent possible, regardless of religious conviction, affiliation, or justification. If only it were that simple. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Was Kennedy Ife demon-possessed? Or did his illness have a more natural, rather than supernatural, explanation? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.